Hello, welcome back to commUNITY. I am joined today by Elena. Elena from StarkMHAR is the Suicide and Community Response Coordinator. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me.
And this is a very important month for you and your agencies. Of course, it's Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. Last week on September 10th was World Suicide Prevention Awareness Day. This, make no bones about it, this is a very heavy topic for a lot of people, a lot of families, and there is a lot of sensitive areas, a lot of sensitive verbiage. I will say ahead of time, if there is something that I phrase incorrectly, please correct me, help correct people, because I think part of the stigma is we continue to use the wrong verbiage. And maybe not maliciously, but we've just only ever heard attempt or words that can be triggers that are just working in a little bit of the opposite direction, whether it's, on purpose or not. So with all of that prefaced, why don't we start with something that I know is very important, the Stark County Suicide Prevention Coalition.
Yeah. So I do want to touch on the language piece.
Yes, please.
We get there too. I really just want to say thank you for your openness to being corrected. I think that the language that we use around suicide is so crucial, and it tends to just perpetuate the stigma. So just thank you for being aware of that first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Stark County Suicide Prevention Coalition, so that's something that I chair. And all month long, we are really trying to really push information out on our Facebook page. So the first thing I would say is for anyone that's on Facebook, feel free, please go to the Stark County Suicide Prevention Coalition and like the page, because there is tons of information that the coalition is pushing out all month long. What's nice about the coalition is that it's not just clinicians that are there. We don't just meet around the table and there's a bunch of therapists. It's really community partners. It is people with lived experience, people that have lost people to suicide, the business community, faith-based, people from schools and law enforcement, just a bunch of different sectors that are all concerned about suicide and recognize that it is a public health issue. And so we meet monthly. We have work groups as well that we're all working to really strengthen our coalition and to ensure that there's a visible presence within our community. So this month really is just all about raising the awareness. I keep using the phrase of elevating the conversation, because I'm sure you've had this where you do the drive-by, hey, how's it going? And you just keep going. We don't stop to actually hear and listen and see where people are and checking in with people. So that's really what we're trying to educate, along with the warning signs for suicide, and teaching people how to reach out, how to ask somebody if they're having thoughts of suicide.
And it's a local organization here. I mean, it is Stark County, so the help, the people are all people right here already within our community, and that is such a big help, because they see the day-to-day that goes on in our neighborhoods, and it's not just, well, that sounds tough, deal with it, I guess.
That's somebody else's problem.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this topic is it's not. And mental health in general, I think it's not just the patient or the person who's impacted directly. It is not the person who might be ruminating or idealizing suicide. It is their support networks that are impacted. It is their friends, family, loved ones. How important is it? And we'll kind of tackle both sides, but from the support side, how vital is it to elevate those conversations? Because I know that if you look across Facebook and someone says, that they're struggling or having a tough day, and everyone says, hey, hope you're doing okay, or message me if you need to talk. But I know through my own, therapy experiences, it's not always about Oh, well, they said I could talk to them. All right, I'm going to do it. How important is it for support network people and people around, these situations to understand that it's not always enough to just say you're there, but being there without kind of necessarily crossing that pushing line?
Sure. Wow, that's deep. I think the hard part is that you never know when somebody is needing help or support. So first and foremost, I would say this applies to anybody, not just people that we know that might be having a hard time. I mean, you look at this pandemic, regardless of what your mental health was beforehand, I don't know anybody that has not been impacted on some level emotionally because of this. And so that's part of that, elevating the conversation of how are you managing? What's it like? I mean, we're all kind of somewhat isolated. But definitely I would say don't just be the like on the sidelines, hey, like I'm here if you need anything. That is nice and people are well intentioned, absolutely. But we need to take more of an active role of reaching out to people and saying, hey, let's talk. And you actually call them. Don't wait for people to reach out to you because chances are they're not going to. You need to be able to, as a support person, be the one to start the conversation. And you don't have to have answers. I think that's where people get stuck, is that sometimes it's, well, what do I say? You don't have to say anything. There isn't the perfect answer that is going to fix everyone's problems. It's a matter of feeling heard.
I think that's so critically important. The part, and I really love that you mention that, and that we say that out loud, that you don't have to have an answer. There's no right answer that you could give that will just magically cure anything. It is such a big process. Now, shifting gears, if you're in a position where suicidal thoughts, ideation might be a thing for you, number one, I think it's so important that people realize there's nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You are not less than. There are people to help, because I think that's one of the things that stops people from getting help, is they think, oh, well, it's just my problem. That classic trope of, I'm the only one that's suffering. I'm the only one that's impacted. It is my problem. I don't want to burden people. What kind of resources here in Stark County and through StarkMHAR, your organization, if you are in that space, with your mental health, what are some places and resources that can be accessed?
Yeah. So before I give you the resources, I want to highlight something that you had mentioned in terms of that stigma piece, or people not being willing to share that they're having thoughts. I think a lot of that does play into stigma. But first and foremost, I don't think we realize how common suicidal thoughts are. There are just varying degrees. I mean, think about when I talk to people, I'll say at some point in your life, you probably have made some sort of statement or had a suicidal thought that you didn't even realize maybe was coming across that way. Think about the times that you maybe have said, I wish I could crawl into a hole, or I wish I could just go to sleep and never wake up. We have like these varying thoughts. And I think that's where we need to realize is that it's very common. I mean, many people have had thoughts of suicide. It's when we take that beyond where we're actually carrying out thoughts about how would we do that we tend to even get more concerned about. Which is why sometimes just being able to listen really can help a situation. So especially if you are concerned about yourself, I mean, we're going to obviously encourage people to reach out for help. I think that's harder. We have to be aware of other people when they need help as well, to be able to reach out for them when they can't do that, or do it together. But the Stark County Crisis Line, it's 330-452-6000, is a wonderful, wonderful resource, because they are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have the mobile response team for both youth and adult that can come out. And what I love about that is that they let you define the crisis. It's not a matter of my problems aren't big enough. I mean, they're there.
I think that's so, all of this is so intersectional. The thought of this is not big enough, or the varying degrees of thoughts from, man, I had to jump off a cliff. This day is the worst. What do you think is most important for people to keep in mind, whether they are as a support network person, or a support person, a friend, a family member, a partner, or if they are somebody who is really advancing those thoughts, those suicidal thoughts? What are some things that everyone outside of that has to remember and be mindful of? We may not think we know somebody suicidal, but us being online and the things that we're saying sometimes, or the ways that we're acting. I mean, is there anything in particular that you think can be more helpful in how we are just existing? I know it seems kind of broad, but I think it is a very specific behavior that maybe we can keep in mind for ourselves.
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind is slowing down. We as a society are multitaskers. We think that that's great, that we should be multitasking. But what happens is we lose sight of those day-to-day interactions. We don't pay attention when somebody is kind of off, maybe for them, or they seem a little bit different. So first and foremost, knowing the warning signs. I mean, I can't tell you how many people that I've talked to that have lost somebody to suicide that will say, like, I didn't realize all of the warning signs that were there, or I maybe knew one of them, but other people knew a couple other signs. Had we have been able to put that all together, we would have been able to see a different picture. So being aware, knowing the warning signs, and also knowing that anybody's capable of having thoughts of suicide, but carrying out those intentions as well. I think sometimes we tend to think, oh, it only happens to certain people. Well, suicide doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anybody. And we always want to think that's not my family. Like my person wouldn't do that. Well, everyone that has lost somebody to suicide has thought that about their loved one as well.
One of the big things that you touched on, I think, is so vital for people to remember, that there is no preset group or demographic. I mean, I think especially right now with parents who have not been able to see their children for months, and maybe that's the only contact they have. I mean, suicide and suicidal thoughts can impact our parents, our grandparents. It's not like once you cross a certain line, you're never going to think that. It would never be an option. I mean, I'm sure there is every single person that you could think of that falls into that impact zone. There's nobody excluded from that. So, I think, and lastly, with this pandemic, you mentioned earlier that mental health for everybody, I think we can all be honest and say that it's grown thinner. While caring for ourselves, what are some of the better practices to make sure that for those that maybe we're living with, or that we're in contact with, safe, distant, limited contact with, how can we make sure that we're checking on them the right way?
So I think making time to have those conversations, we tend to kind of gloss over things, but being very intentional about how was your day, asking, especially if you're living with, doesn't matter, adults or children, but asking those questions about what made you happy today, what made you sad today, really to get more out of instead of just how was your day, good, fine, but digging a little bit deeper as well. But I think for all of us as individuals, being able to be attuned with where we are as well is important. So being able to check in on yourself, Notice when you're feeling tense. I mean, I think like I said, we're in this society where we're constantly going. We don't even pay attention to our own emotional, like the body and the tensions that we're holding.
Yeah, very true.
You know, I am very guilty of that myself. So, being able to take some deep breaths. I mean, it sounds silly, but it really is the most simplest intervention that you could do anywhere that really can just help bring you down.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Elena, the Suicide and Community Response Coordinator for StarkMHAR, we've got links for the Stark County Suicide Prevention Coalition Facebook page, StarkMHAR website, and the Stark County Crisis Line number, all in the caption below, so it's easy, and you don't have to feel like you're rattling off a lot of links and numbers. But thank you so much. I know this conversation is complex. And it's complex because every single person is so different in how it interacts with them in their life or their life of a loved one or someone they know. So thank you so much. Take care during the pandemic. I know you've got little ones. Hopefully we didn't eat too much into their nap time.
Yeah, they're good.
If you want to tell them that you're still going for a few more minutes afterwards, just to keep them going, you absolutely can. You don't have to tell them that you're done.
I like that, right? Yes.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for watching this episode of commUNITY featuring Elena from StarkMHAR, their Suicide and Community Response Coordinator. Take care and take care of each other.
Thanks.